it.
And they're live.
Yeah. Great.
A meeting of the Substandard Living Conditions Special Committee is being called to order at 7 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber. Do you want to call the roll?
Yes. Alderman Ernest Jetty. Alderman at Large Brandon Michael Laws. Alderman Jan Smith.
Here?
Alderman Linda Harry Gaffrey here. And Alderman Tom Lopez, Chairman.
Here.
So we have 3 and we have a quorum.
This period in the agenda is for public comment. Is there any member of the public that would like to make any comment? Seeing none, we're going to move to our first order of business, which is election of a committee clerk. If you don't mind.
May I
Yes.
recommend Linda Gathright, Alderwoman Gathright, for the position?
If there are no other nominations, I'll close nominations at this time. All in favor of Alderwoman Linda Gathright as committee clerk, please say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? Linda is our clerk. I would like to entertain motions for nomination for the committee chair.
Well, I would recommend Alderman Lopez for chair.
Are there any? If there's no other nominations, I'll close nomination. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Nay.
Did we have to do that?
Yeah, it's procedural. So the appointments are made by the president, but we still go through the motions of it in case somebody wants to have their name submitted or.
Oh, okay.
And then finally, I'd like to make a nomination for Alderman Ernest Jetty as vice chair. If there are any other nominations? Seeing as there are none, all those in favor of Alderman Ernest Jetty as committee vice chair, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Seeing none, Alderman Ernest Jetty is our committee vice chair. So we have a period for open discussion. This is basically just a housekeeping meeting where we were trying to identify whose roles would be what, which we have done. But it also is a good time to discuss what our expectations are for this committee and what its purpose is. As a member of the previous Substandard Living Conditions Committee, I can give a little bit of history to that effect. The previous committee was basically addressing public concern regarding the Country Barn and Motel 6 and reports of substandard living conditions. Several of the aldermen investigated those conditions personally. A number of public comments were made with regards to 23 Temple Street as well. Ultimately, it was determined that the best course of action in discussion with the other city departments was to update the city's response through code enforcement, including areas of public health, fire, and engineering, so that the city was able to respond with a fine or a fee that would basically provide a disincentive to discontinuing issues that were contributing to substandard living conditions. Before the committee and before the amendments were passed, the city basically could make recommendations, but until it went to court, landlords were not obligated to take any action. Following it, some more specific measures were employed, and this was done with the expectation that the majority of landlords in Nashua use the city departments and their feedback as guidance. They make corrections where necessary, they appreciate the feedback that they're getting, and basically work cooperatively with the city departments. We had a number of concerns from the landlords that relationship between landlords and the city departments was being upset by this. And the effort was made to ensure that guidance was being given as guidance and that the city wasn't starting to overregulate or restrict the ability of landlords to basically meet the needs of their tenants while also making enough profit to make it worth staying in business. So ultimately it was resolved with those changes to the code. The Substandard Living Committee didn't have additional business, so recessed for a period of time. And so this committee is reconvening not to respond to any crisis or emergencies, but because it was in existence and to decide what kind of approach we want to take moving forward. So hopefully that is an accurate summary. If not, if any members of the public are interested in adding input, then you're welcome to attend the next meeting. But my sense, having been through that first period, is that we should be somewhat proactive in monitoring conditions in the city regarding housing and living. But we should also be respectful of the relationship between the landlords and the tenants and our limited housing stock as well. So we shouldn't necessarily start a witch hunt or try to enact legislation which is unfair to landlords. We should engage them positively whenever possible. And ultimately, we shouldn't create problems where there aren't any. I think the role of the committee, as I envision it, is more educational and being receptive to city departments that may be telling us how business is being conducted in the city. Maybe introducing some presentations on behalf of landlords about best practices, how to collect rent, how to deal with difficult tenants, and then maybe also engaging supportive services, which might generally advocate in tenant and landlord relationships, and just present them in maybe a quarterly format as this is information, this is activity happening in the city. In the event that the Board of Aldermen has legislation that needs to be referred to us, then we could convene more often to address that. So those are just my thoughts. I would like to hear from others how they see this.
Mr. Chair?
Alderman Schmidt?
Watching the videos of the last, I think it was the third meeting that you'd had last time, it was pretty clear that a lot of the people who had complaints about landlords were talking about a long period of time, say for the last 5 years, that they had this problem or they had that problem. One of the issues that we really have to be careful of is that we want to deal with things that are happening now. In Ward 1, I've had people complaining about bed bugs that had frightened them because their property was right next to them. They haven't had it for a long time. They want to make sure it doesn't happen in the future, but for right now, it's safe for them. There are other issues that neighbors have, and I'm sure that's a question that we can look at in the future. But I want to be sure that we're dealing with now and here when we're talking. I love the idea of having landlords come in and explain to us their process. It's got to be extremely difficult to be a landlord in a city. Let's face it, the property values are high. You take who you get, and you don't always know who's going to be there. So there should be some representative of the people who rent as well, who can come before us and tell us what kind of issues that they deal with. So I think this is a terrific idea for us to get together on this. I think looking at the data that's been supplied will help us understand that a lot of the calls from the police have absolutely nothing to do with the landlord. Some of them might, and that should be something we look at. So as we go forward, I think we can use this data to make good decisions for the city.
I would like to know for the record that Alderman Jetty has attended and inform Alderman Jetty that we elected him as vice chair in his absence. Alderman Gathright has volunteered to be clerk, so she'll be clerking during the meetings. Do you have a copy of these numbers, the city's response?
Yes, I do.
Okay, because that was what Alderman Schmidt was referencing. So we're just discussing the general format of the committee moving forward. And what our intentions are. And I think Alderman Schmidt made a very good point about dealing with what's actually happening now. It can be tricky when people have grievances that are unanswered, that need to be answered, but it could also be inappropriate for us to facilitate ongoing disagreements between people who might have had a pre-existing situation and at this point are just looking for resolution that the city may not be able to offer. So I think that's something that we can hopefully reflect with what we address in our agenda. I think the topic of bed bugs particularly might be something we want to talk to the public health department about to demystify it a little bit. I think children are literally raised with, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite. So they're seen as a terrifying demon, whereas they pose not a significant health risk. They do impact quality of life, however. So a landlord without a significant budget to allocate for those resources might have a lot of difficulty figuring out a way to exterminate or address them. So that's where public health could help them weigh the consequences of it and also address the difficulties in doing it. Because from my own experience working in the nonprofit sector, they're like zombies. They just come back from the dead months afterwards, and it can be very, very frustrating addressing them. So talking about best practices and where do you best spend your money? How do you best resolve the situation instead of, ultimately paying for it further down the line? Those might be areas we could discuss.
Yeah, I was late because I was attending I'm a liaison to the police commission. And so their meeting was at 6 o'clock, and I came as soon as I could.
I think we can probably, so we were talking about meeting quarterly unless business was presented before us, like ordinance. So we could probably be careful about when we schedule next time so that we're not double booking you.
Thank you.
So any other thoughts on the business of the committee or how we should proceed? Is everybody happy with the quarterly model unless something presents itself? As chair, I can reach out to the Department of Health and maybe get somebody with some input on how best to address the bed bug situation. And I was also thinking it might be an idea for all of us to reach out to local landlords and gather their input as well, because I think as long as we're sensitive to the situations that they're put in, we'll be able to better advocate between what needs to be regulated and what might be a situation where there are resources or strategies available that your typical landlord might appreciate hearing from. Alderman Schmidt?
Do we have lists of landlords in the city? And what, what facilities they have?
We do have lists. If I recall from our previous meetings, anybody who's a property owner of multi-unit apartments we would be able to get that information. And then we can also talk to the any of the city departments that do inspections, either fire or public health, to get lists of them. We do have this list of calls and responses without necessarily singling any particular landlord out. It's a little bit difficult to parse through exactly what is going on and what's atypical, because some units may get more, or some apartments or addresses may get more calls just because there's a lot more units in them and they're bigger.
Yes, we received just 3, I think. The one I requested for 507 Broad Street, for Temple Street and Layton House. So I would imagine those, the 2 at the end were probably the most busy. Total 600, but there must be other places that relative numbers are high. I don't see anything on here about bed bug searches or anything like that. This is only the police, I think, yes?
I don't exactly, let's see, discussion. Yeah, these are National Police. And so those would reflect crisis situations where the police had to intervene, or management. I mean, they could be indicative of people unhappy with their living conditions, but it could also be reflective of the number of people that are living there, the facilities that they offer, their location in the city. So I mean, the numbers, just as they are stated, is this is how many times police are called. They don't reference any kind of public health issues.
Could we see a report from code enforcement?
Yeah, I think we could ask them for that too.
That would be terrific, thank you.
And I think we have health department information
Yeah, the health department does report monthly
monthly.
on any outbreaks or calls that they have. And it would be very easy to get a summary from them as well. So that could be something we request for the following meeting and have discussion. And it could guide what our agenda ultimately ends up being.
That would be good.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll follow up with that and see if I can get those departments to forward
If
that
we-
information to the committee.
Would they be willing to come before us, say next month, and we can learn a little bit about code enforcement and the health department?
Yeah, I think that would be a very good process, because
Especially-
having just the organizational meeting and then not really substantiating it with what the city's role in things are is probably not a good idea. So we could have a presentation from the different city departments that are relevant to housing.
So that would be code enforcement, it would be the health department. Anyone else?
The fire department.
Good.
But I don't think they cover any, if you're talking about living conditions, I don't see that the fire department's gonna be in on that one.
I think they would do regular inspections, and then they would try to vet any emergency situations, and they could potentially shed light on things where maybe the conditions of the apartment made it more susceptible to fire. I mean, I just think of them typically when I'm imagining somebody assessing for safety of egress or access, whether there's a fire escape. They also have a role in determining safety features, such as what heating is exposed or that kind of stuff. It might be a good idea just to have their input.
Also important as far as substandard living conditions go. I agree.
I think your risk of catastrophe is an element in your living conditions and your quality of life. You can't make anybody feel good to know that there's no way out of their apartment and no one's going to do anything about it.
Yeah, this isn't just the bed bug commission.
So we can have those cities or city departments present on what they do and what kind of resources they have for landlords, and start on that track and then kind of move from there, I think.
That sounds good. That sounds like a good start.
Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, when, this is a relatively new committee, is it not? I'm wondering when it was formed, was there a purpose, a mission?
The original committee was formed in response to issues that gained national publicity at Motel 6 and Country Barn. As the aldermen started to review that situation, more complaints came about specific housing establishments. 23 Temple was identified as one that has a high number of had a high number of violations at the time that were not being addressed in a timely manner. So that committee responded to the situations that had presented themselves. They were essentially resolved because, as evidenced by the ordinance being altered, and then the number of complaints and the visibility to the conditions no longer finding public voice. But we didn't dissolve the committee, because you can't conclude just because nobody's coming forward that there are no issues at all. Well, at the same time, you don't want to create issues or act as though you're in a crisis situation when you don't know that to be the case. So the committee has continued just to be a proactive strategy for identifying issues that might unfold before they fully manifest themselves.
So, may I ask
Yep.
another question? So the title, Substandard Living Conditions Committee, that indicates to me that someone thought that this committee would not be dealing with just housing, but living conditions, like for people who are not housed, people who are homeless. Would that also be within the purview of this committee?
It would be within the title, but without the organizing ordinance, I wouldn't be able to be certain. I know that when I was attending the committee, the focus was entirely on substandard living conditions within a domicile, like that tenants were experiencing. Expanding the purview of the committee beyond that, we should check the ordinance first and confirm that intent. The response was just the Country Barn and Motel 6, but we could look at the language and figure out if more was intended.
You
Okay,
can
so-
actually find the agendas online so that you can read, or I think you could even watch the media from the first 4 meetings they had. It's very interesting to read.
It was in specific response to motels originally, And then it was sort of expanded to rooming houses to look at that situation too, based on the number of complaints. So I would have to look at the ordinance before concluding that it was for all substandard living.
So there is an ordinance that created the committee?
Yeah, it should be 3 years ago. And if I remember the time frame right, it was in December. But I could look that up and then forward it to the committee too.
Okay, thank you.
So without taking a leap off of the sure footing that I thought we were on, we can continue planning our agenda for the next meeting to be city departments presenting on what they've done since the previous substandard living committee convened and what services they offer to landlords. And then if there's additional area that this committee should cover, then we can address that as well.
That sounds good.
All right, if there's no other topics to consider, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
I move to adjourn.
Nope, public comment.
You're correct. Sorry. I would like to invite the public to make comments. And there's also remarks by Alderman, but let's do public comment
Is
first.
this on?
It should be.
Okay. Sylvia Gale, 4 Clergy Circle. And thank you for giving this committee new life. I, as a member of the public, as a housing advocate, as a concerned citizen, I followed the previous committee very carefully, and I was very encouraged at some of the ground that they began to uncover. I would certainly applaud your efforts to move forward, and I think it's very, very important to start by hearing from the city code enforcement folks and fire and health, and to listen to those folks who do that job every day about what their strengths, what their capacities are, and what their limitations are. There are many limitations and many frustrations as a result. I think those are critical areas if we think about places like 23 Temple Street and the Country Barn, where they may have no jurisdiction because of the nature of some of the zoning on those facilities. So it's an important point. Public health in this city does a wonderful and aggressive job about lead, and I'm not so sure about the bed bugs, but the lead identification and remediation program in the city is very enviable for other locations. But it's another consideration. Lead is deadly. It kills. It kills children. It kills brain cells. So I would applaud the city on its job on that. But maybe information that you may not yet have that you might be interested in. And certainly fire. Fire has a role to play. If there are conditions in a home such as, there's another non-technical term for it that firefighters use, I'll just use the word I know, hoarding conditions that they come across, lack of egress, as has already been mentioned. When I did child protection, there were homes that we had to call fire into to help us identify the deadly factors that were in that housing that we could not allow children to stay in. So, fire has a role, public health has a role, code enforcement I know they did the last time. I think they would be delighted to come and give you a full education about what they do and how they do it. And for the most part, they do a job well done, but there are limitations to what they can do. And they have frustrations as a result. So it might be worth looking into, and I applaud you to do that. I don't think there's anything else I have to say, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are any remarks by members of the Board of Aldermen? Alderman Gathright?
Well, I'm kind of excited just to think that we're going to be looking at things like that. I was surprised that I was on the committee, though. But I'm here, and I'm going to do the best I can for whatever our challenges or just in our meetings.
Alderman Schmidt?
Thank you. I know that members of Ward 1, residents there, are very interested in tracking down and finding any problems, making sure it's safe for everyone in the community. And I think this is going to help a lot. Thank you very much.
I'll just say for myself, as representative of Ward 4, we have a number of large housing programs, and we have a large number of people in need of housing. And because of the lack of vacancies, it can be very difficult for people to find housing where they feel it fits their needs. It can also be very difficult for landlords to deal with a population that has a lot of different needs, and the landlords themselves may not have a lot of resources. So I'm looking forward to figuring out ways that landlords can get the resources they need to successfully house tenants, and ways for tenants to self-advocate and identify the quality of life that they're looking for. I think we can do it. I think our city has a really good track record of addressing concerns, has a very robust nonprofit sector, and I think our landlords have good intentions, and we have a lot of newer landlords that may be eager to learn or to discover. We have a lot of newer developers who likewise may be interested in doing the best job that they can for their tenants in the most efficient manner. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes. Now I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
All those in favor say aye,
Aye.
Aye.
and we are adjourned. The time is